Perhaps like you, in my first year or two of climbing, I assumed all the injuries were about the fingers. Over the next 4 or 5 years, I learned otherwise. So today I've got 5 good ones for you to keep an eye out for and hopefully avoid yourself. Sorry, I'm not actually bouldering outside today, but it's really hot and I'm kind of in a rehab phase at the moment, so bear with me. What I see a lot of people do on their falls is try to stick the landing. At a low height, your body can take it, no problem, no big deal. But if you're at a little taller of a height and it's at a point where now your body can't just hold that and absorb it in the muscles, now that force has nowhere to go but straight down over your hips, over your knees, over your ankles, and it all just compresses. If you are gonna hurt something, that's the way it's gonna happen, where you give the force nowhere else to go. And unfortunately, I've got a really good example of it.
Hello, I'm Kayla Jacobs. I have been climbing properly for like 6 years. By properly, I mean going consistently, climbing outside, leading. An ankle injury I got about 3 years ago. Yeah, so it was just a really beautiful day in Southern California on vacation. We were on a route called Checkered Demon. Beautiful line, actually. It's a 3-star V3. It also has a rope grade on it at 5'11" because it is a bit taller, so it does have anchors. People wanted to climb it on rope. Got kind of scared because of how tall it was, and so I fell kind of close to the top, maybe just like 2 moves away or so. Definitely a controlled fall. I knew it was coming. The landing was kind of uneven and rocky, but I think we padded it pretty properly. My 2 spotters were great. When I hit the ground, I kind of got like punted a little bit and went flying, and they still kept me on the pad. But then like once I was like on the ground for a moment, I just like instantly noticed that like there was pain happening on my left ankle.
All right, it has been a few years and it happened fast, but here's how I remember it. It was like a 2-part fall. Part 1 was like straight down. Me and a rando we met, Connor, did a good job of spotting her sort of to land straight up and down, which we were thinking was a good idea. And the pads were underneath her and we kept her over them. But like she said, they were a bit uneven, and I'm guessing her ankle just got, you know, put in a little bit of a weird position, and then all that weight had nowhere to go but down on it. And part 2 of the fall, because it's uneven and hilly, she got kind of kicked back and then like recoiled down, and that's where we sort of had a secondary spot to keep her on the pads.
And I just looked at Justin and I was like, dude, I'm pretty sure I just broke my ankle. Justin and this dude that we met named Connor, we were able to get out and get back to the car. They carried me for parts of it. A nice stranger let me use her trekking poles to do part of it, but it hurt badly, and I couldn't walk properly actually for a while after that. I'm not the one, like the type of person to go to the doctor right away, which isn't great, and so I was just kind of like holding off until I got back home to Chicago.
That is in fact the proper pronunciation. It's like
Made it back to Chicago, ended up going in for an x-ray because I was convinced it was broken. It wasn't, but it was sprained, which, you know, the doctor then told me that oftentimes a break is better than a sprain and can heal quicker and more properly than a sprain, more predictable. So that was a bummer. And at that time I was working at a climbing gym in an era of like climbing pretty hard, stoked on it, you know. Luckily it happened in May, and so it wasn't like fall or anything like that. It took me about a month on like crutches and a walking boot and like wrapping it, being in a lot of pain and walking weird. After that month, was able to start climbing just like ropes, like top ropes in the boots. So obviously not climbing hard. It took me 2 months to start climbing outside, but it still hurt, but I could like do it. And then I also had a pretty bad mental after that because I thought it was a controlled fall. I like wasn't expecting to get hurt. Spotters, great pad setup, and so I never really fully understand like how it happened.
Instead of coming straight down, just be a little off axis pretty much in any direction and get comfortable falling that way. Let me show you. See, I can go down to my left side like that. I can go down to my right side like that. Straight down, with a little backward roll. Or in the most dire of circumstances, hit it with a forward roll. I feel like the bouldering and climbing community at large has done a disservice, or at the very least a poor job of normalizing good falling tactics. I think we've got a lot to learn from sports like parkour and skateboarding and all that. The second really easy way to hurt your ankle is to get caught in an unexpected gap. It's an easy fix in a lot of cases. When you got pads like this that Velcro together, really helps minimize the risk on that.
And so yeah, I think the mental game was an even more difficult thing to get over, and I still feel like I kind of am in the process of getting over it. So yeah, that was 3 years ago, and I still have ankle pain periodically. And so after I learned that it wasn't broken and it was sprained, I just got advice from a friend who's a physical therapist. But I never had like proper physical therapy. I never got like an MRI. I actually still have that thought like on the table, like probably it would be wise to do.
Well, now I feel a small amount of guilt and a moderate amount of sadness. So let's see if we can get something positive out of it. What did we learn, Kayla?
Not delay, getting things checked out. Be grateful for great spotters, because that fall would have been a lot worse if I didn't have great spotters there with me, and then also people there to help me get back to the vehicle. Personally, just choose not to climb high balls anymore, mostly for my own mental, but there are plenty of other things for me to climb. And unfortunately, I'll never get back on the route, but Justin did go and get vengeance for me, and he sent it a couple years ago. I'm pretty sure he projected the top on a rope first before doing the scary moves to the top. So yeah, that's my ankle injury. Ongoing after 3 years, but better than it was. Moving up the body from the ankles, we got the hamstring next. If you've seen my recent video on climber's butt, you already have some inside knowledge on this one. Some people, like Trevor and Caroline, acquire this one through a sudden acute injury, where it happens on like a strenuous move, usually where you're heel hooking above your head or at eye level.
I was on a sport route and there was a move that required a heel hook that was pretty high up, like eye level.
And then hoisting yourself up and over it.
And then you pull your body into it.
You might feel a tear or hear a pop, or something in the hamstring that gives.
I actually heard a tearing sound, and at the time I thought it was my pants.
Ultimately, you may have some pain localized right here at the connection point of the hamstring to the buttock, basically. It's called a proximal hamstring tendinopathy. Could be accompanied by a hamstring strain or tear, usually is. But the other way to get it is through just overuse. Surprisingly, I think the type of work you do is a big impactor to this. If you're an office worker who sits at a desk all day, you're putting some compression on that, and then if you get out and hike on the afternoons or weekends and do a bunch of climbing, that little proximal hamstring tendon there is getting very little time to fully rest, and over time it could get into an agitated state. It's really hard to get out of. That being said, I'm getting pretty deep into my hamstring rehab right now, which starts with a lot of 40-second holds in these bridges, and over time I kind of move my feet out further away so that you isolate more and more on the hamstrings need to do it. The patella knee, whatever it's called, jumper's knee, they've done a lot of research there. And 40-second holds with an 80-second rest in between is really ideal, especially early on, mostly for one pretty interesting reason. At least I find it interesting. This actually applies to a lot of injuries, not just the hamstring, but the body is crazy. When you have a damaged piece of tissue, say you've got this hamstring tendon and it's probably 90% healthy, but 10% of that tendon has some sort of, physical disruption or pain issues or whatever going on. When you contract, your body is smart enough, depending how you think about it, to divert the force around the bit of damaged tissue and just use the 90% that's healthy to take the force through and make the contraction and do everything you need to do. It's a good thing because it doesn't injure you more, but it's a bad thing because it doesn't stimulate the area to actually make a change and recover and align collagen properly and all of that. So these longer duration holds give time for the body to slowly let the force actually pull through that damaged portion as well, giving the proper stimulus for collagen alignment and repairs and I've found really successful at bringing down the pain levels as well, which in my mind is really always step one of all the rehab on these injuries. I actually really do think that this injury can be easily avoided. I don't know if I should say easily, but it probably is easy if you're actually strengthening it up in the gym with exercises that bring it past that same amount of force it'll have to take on a heel hook. It's now prepared for it, strong, and everything's all juiced up and ready to take that force. If that's the maximum effort your hamstring has had to put in over the last several months, then it's likely that it could cause an injury for it. I've been moving up to using a chair or a stool like this, and I really find that it does a great job of isolating and getting more there on the hamstring. Right now at 40 seconds with 2 legs, this still feels pretty tough for me, but as it starts to get easier, I'll go to 1 leg, and right now there's no way I could keep that for 40 seconds. I feel it like ramping up already. As Trevor's been really good about noting in some recent videos, you want to have a pain like 3 out of 10 when you're rehabbing, especially with a tendon. You do need to feel some pain to be sure that you're giving it the stimulus to change that it needs.
About 1.5 years ago, I had a shoulder injury. Never went to see a doctor or got it diagnosed in any way. So I don't really know exactly what it was, but I think it was a rotator cuff tear. I committed full to a dyno, full dyno out, grabbed it all on one arm, and let my body twist around my arm. Well, I heard a noise, almost like a tearing or popping noise, fell off. I actually didn't have much pain right away, and was kind of like, Pretty soon I was like, something don't feel right. Messed around on the wall and was like, oh yeah, something's not right. Stopped what I was doing, went home, and then woke up the next day and I was in quite a bit of pain. I was like, oh, this isn't good. My rotator cuff or my shoulder is hurt. And I basically just didn't even climb for a month after that. Worked my way slowly back into it. It probably took me 3 months to fully recover and be to the point where I didn't notice it anymore.
So Trevor had this incident. Our buddy Brandon has also had some ongoing shoulder issues here for a while now, not to mention my own tweaks over the years. So I do think this probably warrants its own more in-depth video, but in the meantime, we do have some advice for you here.
I guess my recommendation or advice would be to really warm up your shoulders if you're gonna go for big moves, big dynamic moves where you might be swinging or twisting. Just be careful how much load you transfer through your shoulder, especially if it's not warmed up enough or if you're not strong enough for that move.
It can be pretty hard to know if you're strong enough for a move before actually trying that move, and sometimes that might be too late to avoid an injury. So I do think your best bet on avoiding shoulder issues is to get really strong shoulders. There's a lot of great shoulder complex exercises out there, some really specifically good for climbers that'll help build strength in various orientations and have you be ready and ahead of the demand that you may put on it from a climbing move. I feel like that's a bit of a recurring theme here. It's actually kind of similar for the climber's elbow issue as well. It's as long as you keep the forearm muscles and probably the bicep muscles too, I think on either side of the joint play a part in it. But if they stay strong in the gym in terms of their max strength and capability, then when you're out there putting volume on them, for me, it was things like pumpy sport climbing, lots of lock-off training, lots of pull-ups, stuff like that. Those are stressing activities rather than strengthening. And if you start to do too much of those versus the strength or capacity that you have, you might end up in this tendinopathy or tendinosis, itis, whatever type issue in the elbow, very similar to what you can get on your hamstring like I was talking about earlier. Cutting back on both the frequency and the length of my climbing sessions has really helped me get over the climber's elbow symptoms at least. I haven't really tried to ramp back up volume to see if I can maintain that or if symptoms are going to come back. So stay tuned for a future video on that soon. And making our way almost all the way back to the fingers brings us to the wrist. I'm dealing with a self-diagnosed TFCC issue at the moment, mostly based on the doctor diagnosis for both Chelsea and Trevor, who you might have seen talk about their experience in the climber's wrist video.
I'm bad at recording videos.
So I'm not 100% sure if mine is actually TFCC or not, but the good news is it really doesn't matter. Regardless, it's going to be the same protocol to strengthen that wrist, either to avoid this injury yourself or to rehab it afterwards. Another really important consideration on this one to avoid the injury, believe it or not, is once again how you're working. If you're a desk worker working especially on a laptop a lot, I find that sitting the heel of my hand here on the edge can sometimes really bother it. I think in general, it leads to a less healthy, more sort of agitated and injury-prone wrist when you're doing poor ergonomics with it a lot, or like I said, resting your thumb or the edge of your hand on the edge of your laptop a lot. It just really makes it feel bad. And actually, for like the last couple of weeks, I've hardly climbed at all because I've been wanting to rehab this wrist, but I've still seen it get worse in periods of time because of the work on the laptop. The wrist is a complex joint, so there's 6 movements that it can do. It can rotate in this way, it can rotate out that way, it can tilt up and back towards you, or down and away from you, and then it can curl up for the forearm curls, or it can do the reverse for the extensors. So really, no matter what the wrist issue that you have is, the best way to get over it is to get really strong in all those directions so your wrist is well supported and ready to take on the stresses of climbing, which, if you haven't figured it out by now, is really an important part of continuing to progress in your climbing year over year. If you're committed to that, you have to also commit to being a well-rounded athlete, strong in the whole body, ready to take on the stresses of climbing. Otherwise, you're going to continue to have injuries year over year, and it won't be the same thing even. New stuff's going to pop up because of this underlying principle. You just have to be well-rounded and ready to take it. So, of course, a lot of the injuries do focus on the fingers for climbers, so watch maybe one of these videos on that, or check out the climber's wrist or climber's butt video over there, or, whatever.